The first thing you're going to do is open your web browser and go to zoom.us. From here, you'll be on the main page and you will see in the top bar that there is a sign in over here. So just simply click sign in and log in with your information. Sorry. So once you are logged in, you will be brought to your dashboard. It'll automatically go to meetings, and from here you will see that you are logged into your account, and on the left side, profile, meeting setting, meetings, where it will automatically take you recordings and webinars. So just click on webinars. And you'll see I already have an upcoming webinar scheduled right here. And then you'll see at these tabs, upcoming webinars, previous webinars, webinar templates, and schedule a webinar. So just click on schedule a webinar, this blue button here, and this will take you to the screen that has all the information that you want to put in for your webinar. So we'll start with the topic, demo webinar setup. How to set up a webinar in Zoom. That description is optional. You don't have to have that there. And then when you are going to schedule your webinar. So let's say I'm going to schedule this one for the 30th at 11 a.m. and it is an hour long. Now, just because we have the duration set as an hour does not mean that we cannot go over that hour. That is just what our registrants or our attendees will be told how long the webinar is when they are given the information. Time zone, that will automatically change to this time zone that you are set up in using your address. Also, that will default for anyone. Say I send the information to Daria, it will change to her time zone so that there's no confusion. And then down here, you'll see recurring webinar, this little checkbox. We actually will leave this unchecked. That would be for webinar series, or if you're hosting a webinar every Saturday morning, and we could set that and have it do it weekly, repeat 5 days, end date, or after so many occurrences. So that would just be, for example, if this was a webinar set up for how to build a website, and we wanted them to keep coming back to the same webinar for a series, certain amount of time. That's what we would use that for. But right now, we will keep that unchecked. And then you move down to registration. You can have registration for the attendees required or not required. I would also leave that unchecked. That would just require them to register for the webinar, and they don't necessarily need to register for the webinar. You already have that information set up on your own sites and links, so don't worry about that. Also, next would be video. This is where we turn on the hosts and the panelists, so we do want those on. That will allow a host to change attendees from attendees to panelists or to hosts inside the webinar, which is what we're going to be doing. Next, you have audio. So just leave this checked as both. That allows them to either connect their audio on their computer or to call in on the telephone. So for example, I can log in and view the webinar on my computer, but I would call in on my telephone to listen to the webinar. That would be a great option for someone who might have better sound on their phone, whatnot. So just leave that as both. It's easy, so anyone can choose what they want to do. Next is webinar options. So you can require a webinar password. We will leave that unchecked. That would be, for example, if you had a paid webinar and you wanted to send out a password for people to be able to log into the webinar. Disable Q&A. So that is to disable the questions and answers. It would remove the ability for attendees to ask questions. We'll leave that on as well since we do want them to ask questions. And then next is enable practice session. We do want to have that checked. So we always want to make sure that is checked, and I'll explain why. When we log into the webinar, you will see at the top of the screen there is an orange bar. it says attendees cannot join until this webinar is broadcasted, and then there is a broadcast button. So that gives us some time to gather our bearings before we broadcast to the attendees. So anyone who is a host or a panelist will be able to log on and see what's going on. That way we can make sure we have everything in order, we have our panelists on, we have our hosts ready, we know what we are doing, we know that our audio is working, our screen share is working, everything like that. So we do want to have that enabled. And then you have advanced options. So it basically is an alternative host. So that is where I would put my email address in the webinar that I'm setting up for you, Daria. And that would allow me to log on as a host before you are all logged on. So simple. And then we just schedule. And then it will bring you to your management page to manage your webinar. So this is where you see your topic, your description, the time and the date. You can add it to your Google Calendar, your Outlook Calendar, or your Yahoo Calendar. It has your web ID or webinar ID here, and then shows you if your panelists are on or off. Just kind of gives you your information that you have chosen when scheduling that webinar. And then right here, you can save this webinar as a template. So we will probably do this main webinar template and then save it. So every time now we go to schedule a webinar, we will have a template that we can choose from, and it will automatically input all of our information so that we don't have to go through every single time and pick and choose what we want. Now down here you have your invite attendees information. So your webinar size is 100 attendees, and this is the link to join the webinar. That is the link that I gave you to give the attendees and how to access the webinar. You can copy that invitation. We don't need to worry about that. But inside this copy attendee invitation is where it also has the phone, one tap for iPhone, or to dial in from a telephone, and the international numbers. So that is where I grab that information from when I send that to you. You can email yourself the invitation. You don't need to worry about that. So approval. So we can edit this. This is to approve our registration. So if we want to manually approve, so we can go in and decide who can register and who cannot. And then we can send an email when someone registers. We can close registration after event date, allow attendees to join for multiple devices. So that would be, I can join from my computer, and then I can also join from my phone, so I can be on the same webinar on my same account from multiple devices. If you want to have that option, that's fine. I just leave it checked. The only time we ever really want to worry about multiple devices is if you have a paid webinar that you do not want someone sharing that webinar information and having them log in on, say, an iPhone. That would be the only reason not to share that, so it's kind of your discretion. So show social share buttons or on registration page. The registration page we don't actually use, because you're doing everything on your end through Infusionsoft. So that doesn't matter. We're not using the registration page. I just set this as no registration required. So they just enter their email address and display name at the time of the webinar to join. That's the best way for us to do this because of how we are using Zoom for webinars, and you are using Infusionsoft and your own emails and landing pages to market this. So just leave no registration required. They can just enter their name and email when they join the webinar. So simple, easy, done. Questions, add registration field. So this would be if we required them. This would be what we would ask of them to fill out. We can also do custom questions. So if we wanted to ask them what their favorite color was, or what's their biggest struggle with marketing. So we have different questions to answer. That's where we would put those. So right now, let's just worry about approval, no registration required. Save that. And then we can manage the attendees right here as well. So this will show us if anyone has pre-registered. So if we were sending them to the registration page, it would show them here. I don't think we need to worry about that. So we'll just ignore this one for now, but this is where we could deny and block people if we need it for future use. Now we'll go over to email settings. So this is where we would turn off the automated emails that are going out to people. So we just go into edit and uncheck these so that Zoom is not sending emails for us. So right here you can check no invitation, no confirmation, no reminder, no follow-up email. So leave those, make sure those are all marked no. Branding, this is where we upload the banner and our logo. We don't need to use this only because this is mainly for the registration page that Zoom puts together for you. And because we are not using that registration page, we don't really need to worry about this. I did throw a banner up on the webinar for Saturday, but it's not needed. Now, after that branding, you'll have polls right here. So this would be to create a poll for our attendees to answer questions. So if we were doing a webinar on branding and we wanted to know people's biggest struggles with branding, we would have a poll. We would just put in some questions and some answers and some selected answers for them to answer, and that would give you feedback on why they're there and what they're looking for. So we can do those or not. We don't need to worry about it. If we ever do in the future, just know that that is an option that we can set up for you. Next, we have integration. So there's lots of different platforms that we can integrate with Zoom webinars. We are not going to be using any of them, so we don't need to worry about that. Infusionsoft will integrate with Zoom, but you do have to use Zapier. So if we ever do that in the future, but as of now, I don't think that that's something we will need to do. Next, on these tabs, you have live streaming. So after launching the webinar, click More, and then choose the service on which to live stream your webinar. So inside the webinar, we do have the option to live stream on your Facebook page and also on YouTube. So anyone that maybe has not logged into the webinar, it can still be viewed on Facebook as a Facebook Live. So that's a great option if you do want to get it out to more people than just the attendees, the 100 attendees. You can always market it as join my Facebook Live at this time, and they can view that on Facebook as well. So that is the settings and setting up a webinar. If you have any questions or I wasn't clear on anything, let me know. I will also show you how to work the webinar today on our test.